morning, everyone. Welcome to the Ventura Center for Spiritual Living. My name is Reverend Judy Pando, and I am here today as Reverend Bonnie is off. No, not off. I didn't mean it that way. She is not here today. She is doing something fabulously wonderful, I know. And so let's see, Timber Hawkeye is here to talk with us. And there he is. And we have the choir, and we have the band, and we have Kenny, and we have Ed, and we have you, all of you. Woohoo! So let's start this service by singing. And so staying in that space of joyous holiness, I invite Timber to come up and do our sacred reading.
I'll sit over here. Today I want to share, it's an old parable of the lobster. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It was a long time ago when the world was still new. There was a lobster who decided that the Creator made a mistake. So he set up an appointment to discuss the matter, and he said, "With all due respect, I wish to complain about the shell that you designed for me. You see, I just get used to one shell, and then I have to shed it for another. It's extremely inconvenient, and I don't like doing it." But the Creator replied, "You do realize that it's in the shedding and giving up of one shell that we can grow into a new one and change." And the lobster said, "But I don't want to change. I like myself the way I am." "So, your mind is made up, is that right?" And the lobster said, yes, it is." So the Creator said, "All right, from this point forward, your shell will not change, and you can just go about your life the way you have been." "That's very kind of you," said the lobster, and went on his way. And at first, the lobster was very happy with this. He just loved his shell, and everything was fine. But as time went on, he noticed that the shell that was once light and very comfortable was becoming heavy and tight. And after a while, he couldn't even breathe anymore. So with great effort, he made another appointment. And he said, "With all due respect, contrary to what you promised me, the shell has not remained the same. It keeps shrinking." "Not at all," said the Creator. "Your shell may have gotten a little thick with age, but it's remained the same size. What has changed is you inside, beneath the shell. You have changed. You see, everything changes. That's the way I've designed things. And the wisest thing to do is to change along with it. It's to shed your old shell and become the new one." "Yeah," said the lobster, "but you got to admit it's a little inconvenient and uncomfortable." "Yes," said the Creator, "but all growth carries with it both the possibility of discomfort and the potential for great joy. You can't have one without the other." You see, a lobster shell is not elastic. It is hard, and so the shell must, the lobster must shed its shell in order to grow. The overall process is called molting, and a lobster goes through a dozen phases of molting throughout its life. So it spends much of its life preparing for, going through, or recovering from molting. And we are very much like those lobsters. We spend a great deal of time preparing for, going through, or recovering from change. So the important thing, I think, that despite the fact that this molting process is difficult, it is gruesome, vulnerable, stressful, and painful, and it can be downright scary, if the shell doesn't fit anymore, and we resist and refuse change, life actually becomes even more uncomfortable and unmanageable. We've all been guilty of trying to stay the same instead of accepting change and moving on, growing, maturing, molting. So I ask you, are you open to change? Or are you being a little shellfish?
So in the spirit of molting, Let us sing together, I am remembering who I am. In the silence of remembering who we are, let us breathe in together. And as we exhale, soften. Breathing in a second time. And exhale, centering. And one more time, and inhale. And as we exhale, we surrender. And we open to the possibility of change. And we return to the open-eyed state now in love with what is, as it is, and so it is.
This is a song by the legendary poet Leonard Cohen, and it's about change and transformation and shedding the old shell. And it's about the triune nature of the Godhead. And also in some Christian churches, they speak about being grateful. I woke this morning clothed in my right mind. And so we sing, If It Be Your Will. If it be your will that I speak no more, that my voice be still as it was before, I shall speak no more. I shall abide until I am spoken for, if it be your will. If it be your will that a voice be true from this broken hill, I will sing to you. From this broken hill, all your praises they shall ring. If it be your will to let me sing, from this broken hill, all your praises they shall ring. If it be your will to let me sing, if it be your will, if there is a choice, let the rivers fill, let the hills rejoice, let your mercy spill on all these burning hearts in hell. If it be your will to make us well and draw us near and bind us tight, all your children here in their rags of light, in our rags of light, all dressed to kill. And in this night, if it be your will, if it be your will.
The topic of learning from the animals around us to some degree. The topic we selected for today was the chrysalis, which is the one of the phases the caterpillar goes through when it's in its little cocoon, it's in its shell. And I think that not only is that phase an important phase, but every phase is important. And I think about my own life, how I spent many years studying, as many of us have, and then we get a job and we actually practice what we studied. And so it's kind of like we spend a lot of time in our dorm room studying and studying and studying, and then we come out into the world. And at some point, at least I decided, okay, there's got to be more to this. But in order for me to grow more, I need to go back into my shell and study some more. For me, one of the steps in my process was to completely leave the corporate world in which I lived and was extremely successful in by societal definition of what success was. I had this great condo and I had a sports car and I had the designer furniture and the designer clothes, and it looked really good on my social resume, if you would. And I decided there is potential for more growth, not necessarily corporate growth, like climbing up the corporate ladder, but individual growth. And in order to do that, I need to first break free of the cell I was in. In this case, it was the shape of a cubicle. So what drove me was the intention to lead a simple and uncomplicated life. And in many ways, you know, the saying, if you find yourself in a hole, the first thing to do is stop digging. So if I wanted an uncomplicated life, the first step is, many people go, well, I'm going to add yoga to it. I'm going to add meditation to it. I'm going to take Pilates. I'm going to just add more to an uncomplicated life in an attempt to make it uncomplicated. And my method was, before I'm going to add like more stuff to my uncomplicated life, why don't I use the process of elimination? If I want to go from complicated to uncomplicated, first thing to do is to remove the things that complicate it. For me, that looked like giving up the corporate world, giving up the condo that I was so attached to, the furniture, the designer clothes, getting rid of all of it, shedding that really comfortable shell, and being really vulnerable and raw and just throwing myself out into the world. In my case, it was to Hawaii, not a tough choice. But I moved there with no idea where I was going to work, where I was going to live, what my life was going to be like. But my intention was like, I just want to leave a simple and uncomplicated life. And so I removed the complications, which was the job, which was the stress, which was the billable hours, which was relationships and dating and all this stuff. And I just left it all. And I'm like, I'm just going to play volleyball every day. And that was fun for a while. And then I realized, you know, what else could I be doing with my time? I was playing volleyball 5 to 6 hours every day, which is great. And I didn't know what else I would be doing with my time had I not stopped playing volleyball. It's kind of like many times throughout our lives we say, well, I'm going to make a change when I know what's going to come next. Like, I'm going to take that step when I know what comes after it. And we want to see the entire road ahead of us. But I realized I'm not going to know what the next step is until I take the first one. And then the next step will reveal itself. So I decided, I remember calling my dad, and I grew up watching my dad play volleyball, so it was really cool that I started playing volleyball, and then he came to Hawaii and watched me play. He actually joined in a couple of games. And then I told him, I said, you know, I'm really glad you were here for this, because from this point forward, I want to give up volleyball. And he said, what? Why? You gave up the corporate life. You gave up this. You gave up all this. Why this? What harm is there in volleyball? And I said, it's not that there's harm in volleyball, but there could be potential benefit from giving it up. And I won't know what that benefit is until I do, if that makes any sense. So it's kind of like when I tell people, get rid of all the extra stuff in your house, the extra towels, the extra bottles of shampoo, the extra dishes. And they go, what's the harm in having a full china cabinet full of dishes we never use? And I said, well, there's no harm in having that, but there's benefit from exercising that muscle of letting it go. Because then it becomes easier to let go of other stuff. So in this intention to make my life less complicated, I gave up volleyball. And what took its place was a lot of reading, a lot of soul searching. I met a local Tibetan Lama, and I started studying in the Tibetan temple, and I just went inward and inward and inward, and I just started, at first I was reading, so I'm comparing it to kind of like the caterpillar phase when he's just eating a ton. I don't know if you've ever raised monarchs. I know some of you do, and just eating so much. It's amazing how much green they go through. And that's what it felt like. I was studying anything and everything I could get my hands on. I would study with the local rabbi and the local Tibetan Lama, and I would go to church, and I would just consume all of this information. And then, some of you know, I went up to the Lama, and much like the lobster who talked to the Creator, I said, with all due respect, I love the Tibetan teachings, but I don't think the Buddha intended for his teachings to get this complicated. I want a simple life, and you've got multiple arms going on, and you've got this visual stimuli and the faces of all the different evils, and there is the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and the five hindrances. There's just so many numbers, and it was so complicated. And many times people tell me that they've tried meditating, and they're like, well, I can't do it. I'm doing it wrong. And the only reason you feel like you're doing it wrong is because someone at some point told you there's a right way to do it. And I've read those books where you have to sit a certain way, and you have to have your eyes at a 45-degree angle, and then you got to breathe in from one nostril and out the other. I've read those books, and it's not a surprise that many people forget this. I'm just not going to do it. So I consumed as much as I could, and then I said, the Buddha, if I want to stay true to the Buddha's teachings, I said, this isn't it. And I'm really grateful that instead of doing what many of the sects with whom I had met tried to do, which is to convert me, take refuge with us, be one of us, he didn't say that. He said, the Buddha didn't do this. The Tibetan culture did. This is their way. Why don't you try Zen? I think you would like that a lot more. So I left the Tibetan temple and I moved into a Zen monastery, which was significantly simpler, but it definitely felt like the caterpillar going into that cocoon, because we would do 4 to 8 hour sits every day. So just sitting, staring at a blank wall for 8 hours a day. Some of you are going, I don't know how you do that. But keep in mind, I used to sit in a cubicle for 8 hours a day. So this is... I went kayaking the other day for 5 hours, and my friend's like, I can't believe you did that for 5 hours. I'm like, dude, you work 10 hours a day. How does kayaking... It's interesting. Anyway, so that very much felt like going into the cocoon. And in the Zen monastery, what's beautiful about that blank wall is after so many hours, that wall becomes a mirror. And it reflects back to you the very parts of you that throughout our lives, we try not to look at. In fact, we look for distractions to distract us from looking at our own problems. When you really think about it, the reason you point out everybody else's problems is because you don't want to deal with your own. Right? It's so easy to go, you know what your problem is. But it's really hard to look within and go, I'm creating my own suffering. How am I doing that? So it felt very good to be in that cocoon. It was very comfortable. It's like I was in my comfortable shell. Life was good. I was completely off the grid. There was no internet. There was no electricity. It was blissful. Keep in mind that a couple of years prior to that, I took the monastic vows to be of service to others. And for years, I had been sending letters to my friends to let them know what's going on with me and to share with them everything I was learning when I was studying, when I was talking to everyone. But once I went into the monastery, those letters stopped. I stopped sharing with the world what I was learning. I just found my own little comfortable cocoon and said, peace out. I'm just going to stay right here. And a friend of mine, bless her heart, sent me a letter and said, Timber, I know you like it there. I get it. But how are you being of service if you tucked yourself in the mountains somewhere in the middle of nowhere? And I don't regret going, but getting that letter from her, I couldn't justify staying, if that makes sense. Like I said, all right, this served its purpose, and I may come back here from time to time and go into my little seclusion, but I can't spread what I'm learning if I'm keeping my wings wrapped up around me, if that makes sense. So I wanted to leave the monastery, but I didn't want to go right back into the cubicle. And I had learned about the middle path by this point, so I left the monastery and I moved into a temple with Wi-Fi. That was my middle path. And from that Wi-Fi accessible temple, we still had the morning meditations, we still had the 4 and 8 hour sits, we still had all that, but in between that, I had created a platform from which to share what I had learned. And what's nice is that this isn't my message, this isn't my wisdom. People say, oh, thank you for your wisdom. I'm like, this ain't mine. This is ancient stuff. I'm just like translating it into a language that we today can understand. And so that's when I started sharing those letters that I had sent to my friends over the course of many years. I started making them public. So in the sense of the chrysalis, in the sense of going into our own shell, it's not selfish to take care of this. If your intention is to take care of this, so then you can take care of others. So there's a distinction that the intention is what's important. So if you're taking, the Buddha was asked, there was so much to do, and he's like, how can you be taking a nap when so many people need your help? And he said, well, I can't help anyone if I don't get my nap. So even his nap was a selfless act, because the intention was to take care of this so he can take care of others. And I think there's a difference between saying, peace out, I'm out of here, I'm going to go into the monastery and just take care of me, you guys, good luck. Or to say, I'm going to go in and learn what I need to learn about this, because this is no different than this. Alanis once said that we're all battling similar demons, not coincidentally. It's not a coincidence that we're all challenged by the same things. I think, as in the story of the lobster, the creator would have said, I designed things that way. It's so we can help one another, because we're all dealing with the same stuff. It just shows itself in different ways. So the chrysalis phase, the going within, the spending so many years reading and consuming and studying and going to church and going to temple and going to a Buddhist monastery and reading online and meeting different gurus from different paths, that's great, just like the caterpillar is chewing and chewing and chewing. But at some point, we've got to come in and let it marinate, or maybe ferment, or whatever process needs to go through internally, so that then we can spread our wings and fly. Because otherwise we can fly, but we're flying within the little confines of our echo chamber. And that's not true freedom. That's comfort zone. Last week we had a discussion about the importance of stepping outside our comfort zone. I remember it was Deepak Chopra who said, don't think outside the box. Get rid of the box. And when we talked about the comfort zone, Michael Singer in The Untethered Soul was talking about how when we used to want to keep a dog in the yard, we would build an actual fence, and that would be the boundaries, and the dog would know I need to stay within these boundaries. But since then, things have changed. Everything's electronic now, so you bury this wire under the ground, you put a little collar on the dog, and he gets a little vibration every time he gets close, right? It doesn't hurt him, it just feels uncomfortable. And the dog knows, oh, this is the end. These are my boundaries. And I think if we just spend our entire lives getting close to that zone of discomfort and then immediately retreat back and stay in our little space, then our world becomes really small. What Michael Singer said is, much like that dog, go to that point where your collar starts vibrating, where you start feeling uncomfortable and insecure and unsure of yourself, and stay there. Just stay there a little longer until you become comfortable with the discomfort. It's just a little bit. And then a little bit longer the next day, and a little bit, until you're right there, until you can run right past. My parents, when I was a little kid, I used to bite my nails. So many of you probably know that it's a, I don't want to say nail polish, it's a thing they put, it's clear and it tastes bitter. Some of you are nodding going, yeah, mine too. It tastes bitter, so when you put your fingers in your mouth, it's bitter and you stop biting your nails. Well, it doesn't work. Because at first you're like, oh, I don't want to do that. You get used to it. We can get used to a lot of uncomfortable things. I went to college at Stanislaus State where there are more cows than people. You get used to that smell. It's amazing what we can get used to, but if we spend our entire lives avoiding the discomfort of sitting for 8 hours, of staring at a wall, of keeping ourselves in that chrysalis and just wanting to break free, we make our world a lot smaller than it is. So I say find the edges of your comfort zone and stay there for a little bit. Then take another step the next day until that wall, that imaginary wall, disappears. Because the only place it exists is in your own head. Right? It doesn't mean the wall didn't serve a purpose. At first, it was very important. You need to keep yourself confined, but everything is temporary. I'm going to finish with explaining how I went from that to this. So, in the monastery, we were all in monastic robes. We all had the same haircut. We all looked exactly the same way because it was very much in line with the teachings that we're all the same. We're all one. So when you're walking up to the meditation hall and you see someone in front of you, you literally have no idea who it is because from the back, we all look the same. Now, when I decided to leave the monastery and go back into that middle ground, I kept the monastic robes. I was still wearing that shell, which made sense in the monastery, but it didn't make sense outside. In the monastery, the robe said, look at me, I'm just like everybody else. Outside the monastery, it said, look at me, I'm different. Do you see that? And people started treating me differently, which was the exact opposite of what I was hoping. Like, here I am saying, we're all the same. And at the same time saying, look at me, I'm so different. I knew the day that the robes needed to come off when I took the bus and an old lady offered me her seat. And I said, thank you. And I went home and I took off the robes. And I just got a pair of jeans and a t-shirt. So now when I go anywhere and I talk, and the book is required reading in a few high schools, it's in all the prisons across the country, and I go in and give a talk immediately. I remember it was actually here at Rio Mesa High School, or maybe it was Camarillo High, one of the two. I gave a talk in front of a couple hundred students, and when it was over, I heard one of the students go up to his teacher, and he said, he's just like us. And that was exactly the point. So when we look at one another, we have this word, namaste. That means, the divinity in me sees the divinity in you. And that's wonderful and that's beautiful. But there's a whole other side to us. There's ego within each of us too. When we do something greedy, when we do something selfish, when we do something that causes harm to someone else because it gives us pleasure, that doesn't come from the God within, that comes from the ego within. But we don't have a word for that. We don't have the ego in me sees the ego in you. But I think we need one, and I'm still working on coming up with one. But until then, the God within me and the ego within you, they see each other, and they kind of give each other a wink and goes, I see you. I get it. Thank you.
So let's just take a moment and turn within in prayer and just percolate on all that was said here today and all that we felt and all that we heard and all that resonated with us about having the courage to stretch and to grow, because that's the way our Creator wants it to be. And so it is that I know that there is but one life, and that life is God's life, and that life is perfect. That life is my life right now. That life is the life of each and every one of us in this beautiful sanctuary, and each and every one of us everywhere. We are all one with that power, with that presence that created us all and made us one, made us a unified within itself. And so I say, thank you, Spirit, thank you, God, and I move into that little bit of stretch, that little bit of discomfort until the discomfort has no power over me at all. How sweet it is to know this, how sweet it is to be together, to express it and to experience it and to see it in one another. And so with a heart that is overwhelmed with gratitude and joy for this day and this moment, I say thank you, Spirit, thank you, God, and I let it be what it is, what it truly is, a moment of perfection, and so it is.
We go in peace. Now we go with hearts of gladness. We have seen the signs of non-duality. Now we go in peace. Now we go with hearts of gladness. Promises from God of all that we may be.
Now we go in peace. Now we go with hearts of gladness.
We have seen the signs of non-duality. Now we go in peace. Now we go with hearts of gladness. Promises from God of all that we may be. All things pass away. Behold, the new is come. Dreams and visions of the Spirit, that we all are one.
All things pass away. Behold, the new is come. Dreams and visions of the Spirit,
All are one. Now we go in peace. Now we go with hearts of gladness. We have seen the signs of non-duality. Now we go in peace. Now we go with hearts of gladness. Promises from